All right, ever crack open a book and get that powerful urge to just travel back in time and demand answers from the author? Because today we're diving deep into your copy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to do just that. But trust me, we're not rehashing the same old monster movie tropes.
Exactly. Today's deep dive is about uncovering the hidden depths of Shelley's masterpiece, especially in those early chapters that often get overlooked.
Right, we're ditching the Hollywood cliches and getting up close and personal with the people in this story.
Because it's in those seemingly insignificant details, those subtle hints that Shelley drops early on, where the true brilliance of her work unfolds.
Totally. So let's start with our resident Arctic explorer, Robert Walton, and those letters he just had to write to his sister. Talk about wearing your heart on your sleeve.
Well, those letters are more than just brotherly correspondence. They offer a glimpse into Walton's psyche, a man consumed by ambition, yearning for recognition, for someone to share in his triumphs.
And maybe a tad dramatic. I mean, he literally says, I shall certainly find no friend on the wide ocean.
But that's where his fascination with Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner becomes so revealing. It's not just a good yarn for Walton, it speaks to a deeper desire. This guy isn't just looking for a new sea route. He's searching for knowledge so profound, so overwhelming, that it fundamentally reshapes who he is.
You know, that line about him devouring the poem always makes me think about how ambition and isolation seem to go hand in hand.
And that craving for connection, for understanding, becomes even more poignant when we shift our focus to young Victor Frankenstein. Because he's not the one-dimensional mad scientist he's often portrayed as.
Yeah, Victor's story is way more complex than the whole lab coat and crazy hair stereotype. We're talking a guy who had a loving family, this almost mystical encounter with a heaven-sent girl.
An encounter that foreshadows the complex relationship he'll have with creation itself.
And even as a kid, Victor's fascinated by the secrets of life and death, poring over those old alchemy books. But then, after that intense thunderstorm, he just stops, rejects those early studies. What do you make of that?
It shows that Victor isn't driven by morbid curiosity. He even says he turned away from those writers, finding their theories like exploded systems and childish reasoning. This shift highlights a key aspect of his character. He's terrified of the power of the knowledge he seeks.
So it's not just about ambition for Victor, it's about grappling with the responsibility, the potential consequences of unlocking those forbidden truths.
Precisely. And that internal struggle makes his eventual creation all the more tragic. Because when Victor finally brings his creature to life, he's not met with the triumph he expected, but with the stark reality of what he's actually done.
Okay, but we can't talk about creation without talking about the creature's experience, right? And the sources you picked really paint a different picture of his early days than I expected.
It's crucial to approach the creature story with fresh eyes. Imagine being thrust into the world with no context, no understanding of even the simplest sensations. Light, darkness, the sound of birds, even the pain of fire. It's all a confusing, overwhelming sensory explosion.
He's like a child taking his first stumbling steps, except he's doing it with a body that terrifies everyone around him.
And despite that fear, despite being treated like a monster from the moment he opens his eyes, the creature still yearns for connection.
You see it most clearly in his interactions with the DeLacy family, right? He's genuinely drawn to their kindness, their simple acts of love. He even wants to help them, to be a part of their happiness.
Which makes the way they react to him all the more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because it's their rejection, their fear that plants the seeds for the rage and despair that consume him later. It's a tragic turning point. Here's a being literally wired for empathy, yet his appearance becomes an insurmountable barrier, twisting his need for connection into something darker. But let's rewind for a second, because this craving for knowledge that we see in Walton, the way it manifests in Victor, that's a huge thread running through these early chapters, isn't it?
Totally. It's like both of them are drawn to those edges, those places where knowledge bumps up against the unknown, even the forbidden.
Exactly. And this theme would have resonated deeply with Shelley's audience. The Enlightenment had ushered in a new era of scientific discovery, but it also sparked anxiety about what humanity shouldn't tamper with. Think of it like a modern-day Prometheus myth.
Okay, yeah, I love that comparison. Stealing fire, pushing boundaries. Victor even hits a point where those old mystical texts he rejected as a kid become his obsession again, right? Only now it's all about recreating those wonders through science.
Precisely. Remember that powerful scene with the oak tree being struck by lightning?
Oh man, it's like nature unleashed.
Yep.
Beautiful and terrifying at the same time.
For Victor, that event is pivotal. It rekindles his childhood fascination with the power of creation itself, but through a new lens. He abandons the childish reasoning of alchemy for the tools of modern science, convinced he can harness those same forces.
And he does, but there's this constant sense of dread even before the creature takes his first breath. Like Victor knows he's crossed a line. He even describes his work using phrases like filthy creation and talks about the unhallowed damps of the grave.
Exactly. Shelley is carefully constructing this tension between Victor's scientific ambition and the moral weight of what he's doing. It's as if by daring to create life, he's violated a sacred boundary. No wonder he's horrified by what he's unleashed.
And the way he reacts, running away, trying to forget it ever happened, it's almost cowardly, but you can also sense the sheer terror he feels.
It's a deeply human response.
Mm.
Victor's desire to bury the truth, to convince himself it never happened, speaks to the enormity of his transgression. He's not just afraid of the creature, he's afraid of the knowledge that he created it.
And the truly messed up part is how easily everyone around him accepts his lies.
That speaks to Victor's deep-seated need for self-deception. He's so desperate to believe his own version of events that he draws everyone else into his web of secrecy with tragic consequences. Just look at what happens to Justine, the family servant.
Accused of a crime she didn't commit, a crime that Victor's creation is actually responsible for, it's infuriating.
And it highlights the profound injustice that lies at the heart of this story. Victor, driven by guilt and fear, remains silent, while an innocent woman suffers the consequences of his actions.
It's easy to judge Victor, but I can also understand his hesitation to come clean. Could he even begin to explain what happened without sounding completely unhinged?
Exactly. Imagine trying to convince people that you discovered the secret to creating life, that the being terrorizing them is your own monstrous offspring. The fear of being labeled a madman, of facing not only condemnation but disbelief, it's a burden that Victor simply can't bear.
So he retreats further into himself, hoping to outrun his creation, his guilt, maybe even his own sanity. But as we all know, you can't outrun the consequences of your actions forever.
And that brings us to that chilling encounter on the glacier, where the creature finally confronts his creator. He doesn't just demand answers from Victor. He demands companionship, understanding.
And for a brief moment, Victor almost wavers. It's like he sees a glimmer of the creature's humanity, recognizes his own role in his suffering.
He even considers the possibility of creating a companion for the creature, a being who might ease his loneliness and share the burden of his existence.
You can practically see the hope flickering in the creature's eyes. But then...
Fear takes hold. Victor recoils, terrified by the potential for more monstrous offspring, for a whole race of beings born from his hubris. But is that truly the source of his fear? Or is it possible that he's simply afraid to face his own responsibility, to acknowledge the depth of his transgression?
That is a really good question, and it's one that resonates even today, don't you think? The idea that with great knowledge, with the power to create, comes a responsibility to consider the consequences, even the unintended ones.
It's a dilemma that's as relevant now as it was in Shelley's time. And as we delve further into the depths of this story, we'll see just how far-reaching those consequences can be. But before we move on to that, I think it's worth pausing to appreciate the creature's incredible journey of self-discovery.
Oh, absolutely. Those chapters where he's hiding out in the woods, teaching himself to read, observing the DeLacy family. It's like we're witnessing the birth of consciousness itself.
It's a crash course in humanity. But from the outside looking in, the creature devours knowledge, soaking up language, history, philosophy, all the while grappling with the fundamental questions of his own existence. Where did he come from? Why is he different? What does it mean to be human?
And those questions take on this whole other level of sadness when he finds that blank book, the one meant for recording his own history, his own lineage. Talk about a punch to the gut.
That blank book becomes a powerful symbol of the void at the heart of the creature's being. He has no origin story, no family, no place in the world. He exists solely as a product of Victor's ambition, a stark reminder of his creator's transgression.
It's wild, right? You really start to see these characters in a whole new light when you dig into those early chapters. Like, we've got Walton chasing his crazy ambition, Victor drowning in the responsibility of playing God, and the creature just looking for a place to belong. It all kind of makes you think, what does it actually mean to be human?
Yeah, and what's really interesting is how those themes hit even harder when you think about the women in this story. They don't get nearly enough credit.
Oh, for sure. It's not all dudes and doom in Frankenstein. You've got Elizabeth, Victor's adopted cousin, who he's basically supposed to marry. She always seemed like, I don't know, a symbol of innocence in this whole messed up situation.
Yeah, she's definitely portrayed as this Ideal, womankind, compassionate, always there for Victor. But she's also trapped in a lot of ways, isn't she?
Totally. Stuck in those societal expectations, family duties, this feeling that her whole life is already decided for her. But then you see these flashes of something stronger, like when she stands up for Justine, even though it means doubting Victor.
Exactly. Those moments show us that Elizabeth isn't as passive as she seems. Even when she's left in the dark, she's still this moral compass for Victor, a reminder of the human connections he's risking with all his crazy experiments.
Which brings us back to that whole Gutenberg thing, right? The no restrictions clause you mentioned earlier. Feels like you're about to drop some serious knowledge bombs here.
Maybe, maybe. But let's imagine for a second. What if we took everything we've learned from these early chapters and rewrote Frankenstein ourselves? What if we explored those loose ends that Shelley leaves dangling?
Okay, now you've got me hooked. You mean like, what if Walton actually had a good crew? People who understood his ambition and helped him stay on track.
Exactly. Or picture Victor facing the same choices but choosing love over ambition. He puts Elizabeth first, realizing that human connection is way more important than chasing those forbidden secrets.
And hold up, what about the creature? Could you imagine a world where people accept him, where they see his intelligence, his empathy, instead of just this scary monster, someone who finally gets him?
That's what's so cool about a book like Frankenstein. It makes you think, you question, you come up with new possibilities. It's not just about what's on the page. It's about those bigger questions about ambition, creation, what it means to be human. Those questions stay with you.
So it's less about changing Frankenstein and more about realizing the story never really ends, right?
Yeah.
It makes you keep asking those tough questions, wrestling with the ideas long after you close the book.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe you'll make some pretty amazing discoveries yourself as you keep exploring this incredible book.